Just a second, guys.
So the next class we have will be technically semester 1, day 1. Right?
Yes, next class we have will be semester 1, day 1.
I've been so excited for that.
So
Start from the
sense.
beginning, actually. I mean, this is a catered
But it is good
just
just
to
to
start.
Yeah, next class will definitely be intro, day 1. Yeah.
And then we're going, we won't move.
Yeah.
So actually build a relationship.
You can also live stream it. I'll live stream the videos or the classes. All right. Whoops. Day 1. Yeah. That was weird.
Jesse, could you read verses 3 and 4?
Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others.
What's the next verse?
Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus.
Right. And after that, he describes how our Lord Jesus humbled himself, God the Son, not clinging to his rights, but emptying himself, being a servant for us, and ultimately dying on the cross for us. Just like we talked about last time, how do you forgive? Well, you forgive because of what Christ has done for you. Well, how can I learn to treat the other person as more important than myself? Well, it says I'm united to Christ who did that for me. But here, and typically in a conversation, especially if you're in an argument, like you said, Sarah, that while the other person's talking, what are you doing?
Already probably preparing your response.
Reloading.
Yeah.
and your mindset is, if this person just would listen, then everything would be fine. But of course, that is a violation of these verses, where instead of considering the interest of the other person is important, what they have to say, and listening and understanding, we focus on ourselves. But as we say, well, how can I do this? What's the process for it? And I'd actually like to share with you something that we use quite a bit. I brought a couple copies here on peacemaking principles, and it really goes beyond peacemaking to communication. I brought it's a little summary. It's actually based upon a book called The Peacemaker by Ken Sande, who is actually he would call himself, I guess, kind of a recovering lawyer. He got frustrated seeing Christians in conflict and not following biblical principles, so he wrote a book about it and started a ministry. But he describes in here some basic principles of conflict, and conflict is unavoidable, right? I mean, you're going to have differences, but conflict also, he describes here, gives us an opportunity to glorify God. The difference between Christians and non-Christians, or Christian marriage and a non-Christian marriage, isn't that we don't have conflict. It's that by God's grace, we deal with our conflict differently, and we have, because of the gospel, we're able to resolve our conflicts in a way that honors the Lord. And so he talks about how the gospel is the key to peace. Now, usually, actually, y'all actually are very pleasant to each other and very pleasant to me. Sometimes when couples come in here and they've got big conflicts, what typically happens is the wife sits here and says, well, let me tell you about my husband, and she starts wanting to lay into him, and then the husband, as soon as she takes a breath, jumps back in and says, let me tell you about my wife. And but biblically, that's the opposite of what we're supposed to do. Look at Matthew chapter 7. And Sarah, can I have you read this time? Verses 1 through 5.
Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye.
Okay. That's familiar to both of you, I think, isn't it?
It is.
Okay. So have you had any, I mean, do you have an example of any kind of conflict you've had recently?
Well, yeah, the other day, I had a friend from work come over to the house for dinner, and I didn't think it'd be that big a deal, but apparently it was pretty big. I mean, I
There's no warning.
well, it was one.
Really? Yeah, apparently it was a big deal. And then, yeah, it's funny. I just talked to a couple where that was the issue. Like, yeah, I learned I needed to communicate when I made changes. Yeah. You need to talk to your wife when you make changes in your schedule, because I know one guy. It's so funny. It's so funny. He like his wife was gonna. I think actually she prepared a steak dinner. This couple, the wife prepared like a nice steak dinner. Was like super excited for the husband to come home, newly married. He's like, he just like went golfing after work. Didn't tell her at all. Just went golfing by himself. Like, I'm just gonna go golfing. He gets home and the wife's like, here's your steak, potatoes, and asparagus, whatever, honey. Hope you had a good time golfing. Hope your day was good. I love you. Can I sit down and talk while you're eating? Like, she was super gracious, and he was just like, he didn't even understand the problem. Until 3 days later, he's like, oh. Oops. Oh man. When I heard that, I was like, yeah, man, you gotta talk to your wife, dude. You should never do that. I think now, with iPhones, you can couples, you can find out where your
Share
spouse
your
is.
location.
Well, just on if you're on the same iPhone plan or whatever or something.
Get off that golf course right now.
Yeah, I can see my wife can see where I am. I can see where she is. Unless up at the bachelor party, she texted me and I got it at 11 o'clock when I got back into town. She's like, I can't find you on my iPhone. I'm going to bed. I'm really tired. Let me know when you're on your way home. That's pretty funny. But yeah, so.
That's actually kind of a cool accountability thing for couples.
Oh yeah, totally. Oh, where are you at, honey?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't respond, it's like if you left your phone at work or something for a long time, obviously she's gonna what the heck.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I'll do it when she's like, oh, she goes to a leadership wives meeting and she's like, I'll be home at 10. And it's 11. I'm like, what? Are you dead? Where are you?
One person. I mean, it wasn't like I brought home everyone in the office. I just thought.
So you just kind of unannounced, your friend came home with you and you said you'd give him dinner?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you just showed up and said, honey, we're home, or?
Well, I mean, I came into the kitchen and I was like, hey, Tom came and all was okay. So.
Okay, and what did you do?
I didn't really, I was just really frustrated. I just looked at him what were you thinking? And just tried to figure out how I was going to make the food stretch to 3 people. Sometimes I make enough where multiple people could eat, but he doesn't like leftovers. And so I've actually taken a lot of time to learn how to cook the exact amount of food so we have exactly enough for us and no leftovers, because he doesn't want to eat leftovers, but we can't afford to waste food. And even tonight, it was a really busy day. I had a doctor's appointment. He knew it was going to be a really just busy day.
Okay, so you're explaining what you were thinking and why you were frustrated. Did you do anything wrong?
So he cuts her off because she's kind of going, and he cuts her off. Dr. Street says sometimes the most important word in counseling is whoa. Stop talking.
Yeah.
Whoa there. So, whoa there, buddy. Slow it down. Sorry, what?
She got angry.
Yeah, she got angry, so it's good. You explained your response, you explained what you did. Did you do anything wrong? And look at his face like, yeah. Good question, counselor.
Loved his delayed
That's a great
response.
question.
After Jesse was like, I just didn't see the big deal, and he was just like, so.
Yeah, the counselor's like, what? So you just like showed up? Sometimes when I talk to people and I talk to them like that, they look at me like, are you being sarcastic? Like, no, like that was just a dumb move. I'm not being sarcastic, I'm just telling you it was stupid.
Sure, is it okay if I pay your price real quick? I dropped Todd off today. And
Are you, what?
Todd did that
That
today?
did happen.
Yeah.
Although I had Summer
True, that happened to me today!
No, well, I had Summer and I were hanging out, but I didn't tell Todd that she was coming over. But it was literally like a 10-minute thing, but Todd wasn't home. But then
Yeah.
Todd shows up and he goes, hey, JP's here. And I was like, Summer's here. It's fine.
It's so
I
funny.
just realized I did that.
Yeah, it's fine.
And to be fair to Jesse, I've done that before too. I'm like, hey honey, so and so's coming over. Like right now, because there's their car. She's like, why did you tell me? Like, I forgot until I saw their car. Yeah. Yeah.
You what? Yes.
Yeah. We all make dumb mistakes, so I can sympathize with them. I understand though that it's a big deal, and I forgot to tell my wife about it.
Especially after like finessing,
No,
so
I
that
did
you
that
only
one time.
have.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we caught, I was on a mission in Honduras, and like we caught like fish, and the people I was under were like making this meal, and I invited
Yeah.
the neighbors. And I was like, evangelistic outreach, like I invited our neighbors, and she was like, this was like really nice fish, and it was only meant for us, and you like didn't ask me. And I was just like, it was a huge lesson learned for sure.
Yeah, and again, as Brooke pointed out, she tries so hard to like make enough food just for them, because he's picky. I don't want leftovers. Get over it, man. Eat leftovers. Be godly.
You heard it.
And
From
eat
the elder.
leftovers. Yeah, you heard it from the elder. Be godly and eat leftovers.
We
Eat
need
what
a
you
t-shirt.
don't
We
like.
got me. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a t-shirt. Yeah, there you go. All right.
I mean, I was angry inside. I mean, on the outside, I was still like the hospitable host to the
Right,
guest.
but it was
and-
obvious.
But I mean, I was angry, and I know he knows me well enough to know that I was like really upset with him.
Okay, so so in your heart, your response to that was you were angry. And I appreciate you got there so fast, because again, implying,
Okay, so a couple things there. Obviously, he's trying to be encouraging, but she's like, "Well, I was angry.
Justifying yourself.
Like, stinky caught me. I was angry. Good, great." He's like, "Oh, it was obvious."
Yeah.
Come on, man, knock it off. Don't say that. That's she should like turn around and say, "What?
You're trying to get whooped.
What are you doing?" Ephesians 4:29, honey.
Cat,
Yeah.
kids. Yeah,
Yes. One kid, is that right? Yeah,
Yeah.
one. I think just one kid.
Very small child.
Yeah, a small child.
Because they mentioned she was only cooking for 2 people, and I thought
Yeah, I think the child. Yeah, I mean,
Baby's probably not even stable.
unless it's like an Owen, you can cook for 2 and have enough for like a baby. If it's like if you're cooking for like a Noelle, you can cook. Yeah, you barely give her anything. She's like stuffed. But Owen will eat more than me.
principle here, Jesus says when you look at a conflict or situation, you want to look, where was I at fault? Where did I sin? So, you're saying, do you think that was sinful?
Yeah, I was.
Okay, so you agree you didn't have a right to be angry.
Yeah, I know it was a sin to be angry. It still seemed in the moment that it was justified. I mean, it was like it was a sin, but it still seemed, in the moment, it seemed justified. And I guess I didn't think of it as, I can see it as anger now. as we're sitting here thinking about it, but in the moment it was more just, I'm really frustrated. And so frustration didn't have the same.
You're good.
Uh-huh.
You see his face like, yeah.
Yeah,
All right,
same
be quiet.
thing.
Let me tell you something. That's what he, as you can tell, that's what he wants to say.
Feel was like anger. I was just really frustrated because I cooked his favorite steak and there was exactly enough for the two of us.
Yeah.
So it felt like more of frustration because I wanted to do this really nice thing for you and have a steak dinner when you came home, and you messed it up because now we have to chop it up and put it into a salad, and it's so in the moment it felt justified and didn't feel like sin.
Right.
But looking back,
All anger seems justified, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we talked last time about this. Maybe you can make a copy of the little card he has for you. But yeah, anger is a reaction when we think we've been treated unjustly, and we find words, especially as Christians, we know it's sinful to be angry, so we'll say we're frustrated, and somehow that makes it sound less sinful.
So that's
Did you sin in that situation?
Well, I mean, I don't think bringing someone home for dinner is a sin, and I mean, it's frustrating, and I'm sure like there were expectations that were broken, but like initially I would say no, but I mean I know that once she got mad at me, and I felt that was unjust, that scale inside, I was just I didn't handle it.
What did you do after that? I assume it was like after Tom went home, or even while he was there, or what happened?
No, well, I mean, I don't know. We talked just real briefly in the kitchen when he was there, but yeah, once he left, he left pretty quick. I think he knew.
Maybe he was hungry.
Yeah. But yeah, afterwards, like I was really upset, and I tried to just talk to her about it, but
Oh, that's awesome.
What did you tell her?
well, I just felt like it wasn't fair that, I was trying to have, good guy time, and I didn't think I was trying to, like, also be available for the family, and it just seemed unfair that just because she, didn't know he was coming, that all of a sudden I was in trouble.
Do you say it just like that? Or did you say it loudly or calmly
Well,
or
I don't know. I was pretty upset. It was louder.
intense?
Yeah.
And how did that affect her?
Well, she got mad back, and it just, I feel like it just escalated. We ended up just like yelling at each other about steak. It was dumb, and
It wasn't about steak though. It was really about
Right.
your relationship.
right.
Okay.
Good. Tough.
And it's not that incident is the big deal. I just like to use it for a few minutes to kind of teach these principles, because the principles will work in all the other situations that come up, and they come up every day, especially in marriage where you're constantly together and you've got a lot of pressure on you. But as you look at a situation like that, again, typically what we do is to say, well, here's what she did wrong, here's what he did wrong. And the focus has to be first. Jesus says, first you need to do what? Get the log, the plank out of your own eye. Almost always in my conflicts with my wife and other significant conflicts I've had in my life, there's something I've done wrong. And maybe in my heart I'm 90% right and they're 10% wrong. They're 10% right. But even the 10% I'm wrong, I should confess. And so as you look at a situation like that, I think it's very important when you're in the conflict, it's kind of like the anger thing, where you have to stop and think about this biblically, that Jesus wants me to really focus on where my sin is here instead of on the sin of the other person. We want to be judges. When he begins the passage saying, don't judge. In that situation, you both, in your own heart, had grounds to judge the other person. He wasn't courteous to me. She acted peeved with me in front of my friend, and then the other things that kept happening. But Jesus says the focus has to be on where have I sinned, and then how do you get the plank out of your eye? What do you think you have to do in order to accomplish that?
You have to stop thinking about yourself and how you were wronged and whatever, and start thinking about like, okay, well, how does this, look from her perspective? Or
Right. That's good. Applying the Philippians 2 passage is thinking about it, considering her perspective, her interests ahead of your own. But what in practical terms? Maybe, sir, do you have any idea of how can I actually, I've got a plank, let's say that I was grumpy to my husband when he brought an unexpected guest home. And the grumpiness, the anger that I display is like I've got this log in my eye. How do I get it out?
Confessing that sin to the Lord and praying that He would help.
Confessing it to God that it was sin? Anybody else?
And to Him, even
Yeah.
if He hasn't seen it, is just being willing to
Right.
confess that sin.
I see you paid attention when I preached on biblical peacemaking. That's encouraging. Right. Sometimes, though, you hear something from the pulpit in general, and it makes sense, but then when it's your own family, you need to get really specific to be able to do it. But Jesus says in Matthew 5, if your brother has something against you, even leave your offering and first be reconciled. And so when you've wronged somebody else, it's important to God. Again, first, you're right. First, you need to confess it as sin to God. But then to go to the person whom you've wronged to seek their forgiveness. Now, one thing that can be confusing, that in both cases, you both wanted something you thought was reasonable, right? And just for a moment, look at James chapter 4. And we're just going to have time today to get started on this. I'm going to give you some homework that will keep you going for a while. But Jessica, could you read verses 1 and 2 of James chapter 4?
What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You want something, but you don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God.
Thank you. So he says, and this is a great question. I love that this verse is in the Bible this way, because he asks this question, why do you fight? Why do you quarrel? Y'all been married for several years, and probably like to know, why do we fight? Why does this have to happen? We liked each other really well, otherwise we wouldn't have married each other, but now we're quarreling a bunch. Well, he gives the answer. Why do you fight?
It's God's word.
You want something but don't get it.
Yeah, you want something. And when you don't get what you want, maybe like your child, she didn't get what she wants, then mad, but we can be like that. We are like that.
So what's a good question when you think about the three-tree diagram or the relationship diagram? Yeah, you're trying to get down to the heart issues. What kind of question do you ask to get down to the heart of what did you want? Here's some good questions.
Stop.
All right, let me
Like that.
all right. And I pretty much just asked the question for you. But what question?
Like, what are you worshiping?
Okay, yeah, what are you worshiping?
That's not asking you this.
How did you want it?
How did you want that to work out? Okay.
What are you wanting?
Yeah, what are you wanting that you're not getting? Good job, Justin.
So what are you getting?
Or what are you getting that you don't want?
I
Good.
feel you're entitled to a peaceful,
Okay.
Well, and why do you want that?
You're good. Yeah. Why do you want that? So that's a good follow-up question. What were you getting, or what were you not getting that you really wanted, or what were you getting that you didn't really want? And why did you want that? Right? This, a lot of the hard questions are kind of the why, the motivation, why. And with your kids, with our kids, why, you can say, well, why did you take the dolly from little Sally in nursery? I don't know. And they don't. That's why you have to tell them. You have to teach them the heart. Well, what did you want? I wanted the doll. Okay? You wanted the doll more than you wanted to serve little Sally, your friend Sally. You need to love Sally more than yourself. But I wanted it. I know. And so you took it because you sinned. You loved yourself more. Same with adults. They don't get this. Adults don't understand this. What were you wanting such that you sinned? What were you wanting such that you were willing to sin against your spouse that God gave to you? And you sinned. Or your kids, or your friends, or your roommates, or your parents, or your pastor, or your boss, or whatever. What was so important that you had to sin to get something that wasn't worth it? Why did you want that? Because I wanted, and again, they're not going to know why they wanted it. You have to teach them instruction. You wanted it because you wanted your own gratification. You wanted your own self to be pleased more than you wanted to please God in 2 Corinthians 5.
And what can be confusing to us sometimes is often the thing we want isn't a bad thing. What did you want?
I just would have wanted some consideration just for him to let me know even on his way home. Or even, I mean, after that, once he had done it, once he walked in with his friend, even if he had come into the kitchen kind of apologetic and like, I know this is going to inconvenience you and I'm sorry, but it just happened. But there was just not even any of that. I just want some understanding.
Right, you wanted your husband to understand you.
Right.
1 Peter 3:7 says husbands are supposed to live with their wives in an understanding way. So if you would have been a more understanding husband, what would you have done?
Well, I mean, I would have just talked to her before I even asked Tom over,
Right.
you know.
Ask beforehand,
Yeah.
and then if you failed on that point, then after you've asked him, then you call her and say, I've done this, and I you know, right. So you had lots of opportunity to show those understanding, right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but back to you, Sarah, that now, it's not wrong to want a husband who understands you and is considerate. But the question is, what are you going to do when you don't get what you want? And that's what James is describing here. It says when you desire something, you don't get it, you commit murder. Did you commit murder?
Yes.
Right. With sinful anger. And, I mean, that's, when you've been married, you don't have to yell at somebody to yell at them. You know, like I said, even if it's not that obvious to Tom, that you can give him a look that shows you've really had it with him. And that hurts. But here's what we have to really think biblically about this, is that one of the hardest situations in which to recognize our own sin, and you're doing it, so you're doing great, is the thing we wanted was something we thought it wasn't wrong to have. It's like, what did you want?
Yeah, I just wanted, like, time with a friend, and I just wanted to, you know, be treated like an adult. Like, I didn't, you know, have to ask for permission every time I wanted to play with my friends.
Well, you wanted your wife to.
Oh,
No, he didn't.
Oh, come on, guy. Oh, snap! Yeah, I mean, those of you who are married, you know, you're not asking for permission. It's preferring. It's a preferring. And honestly, we don't need guy time. I don't need my guy time. You have a wife. You have guy time like you can do that other times. Like, yeah, you can schedule certain things, but to be kind of selfish that way, oh, I need my guy time. No, you don't.
It's like in The Incredibles. It's like, it's for the greater good. And she's like, I'm the greatest good you are ever gonna get.
Oh my gosh.
You see that in The Incredibles?
The Incredibles. That movie's awesome. Dr. Street is Mr. Incredible, by the way. He looks like Mr. Incredible. He looks. Anyway, yeah, that. You know they're coming out with the Incredibles 2.
Oh, is
Yeah,
that right?
I've been waiting for that.
Oh.
As long as they don't ruin it. They
The
notoriously
previews look pretty cool. Like some of the movies that come out like really quickly with, they kind of ruin them, but they've waited what, like 15 years or something.
It's been a little bit.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, he shouldn't be speaking that way. Again, it's showing his selfishness, his arrogance, it's showing he wants what he wants without regard to other people.
To be supportive.
Right.
Kind of way.
And I do
Treat like
feel
adult
like-
has a bit of sarcasm to it.
Well-
So,
Like, I really wanted to have friends. I would love for him to bring his friend home for dinner. I just,
right. So, but I mean, what you wanted was a wife who would be supportive of that.
Right.
And probably a wife that when you made a big mistake was gracious about it.
Right.
instead of getting angry. Again, none of the things you desired were in of themselves wrong. But the question is, because you're a sinner married to a sinner in a world full of sinners, sometimes the things you desire are not going to be given to you. And then what are you going to do? Well, what you did was you became angry. Like it says here, you murdered, which made things worse. And so back to Matthew 7, that when you see I did wrong, and again, this is where it can be really hard for people to apply Matthew 7. It says, but it would have never happened if he hadn't brought him home. Or it would have never happened if she had just been nice about it. But Jesus says, no, you need to focus on where your sin is. And really, for believers, you should be like racing each other to the cross and saying, there's no excuse for what I did, please forgive me. And that I should have told you, please forgive me. I should have, and then when I spoke in anger with you afterwards, there's no excuse, please forgive me. And likewise, I should have been gracious. And actually on the back of here, and I'm going to give you an audio that goes through this in some detail, more detail than we have right now, that goes this entire peacemaking process. But he has here the 7 A's of confession.
That's very good.
And when you realize that it's your responsibility to seek forgiveness from the other person and to do it first, to go, get the beam out of your own eye first, it's also important that you do it well. A lot of times in a situation like this, and like you say, well, I'm sorry I was a little grumpy when you brought that guy home without telling me, and and sometimes apologies are done so badly, or I'm sorry you were so sensitive about me bringing my friend home, that it doesn't really solve anything. And biblical peacemaking, we really want to bring a reconciliation that lasts. And that's
Hit it. It works. So one of the other video we saw with Heath Lambert, remember when the guy confessed to his wife he was looking at porn every day? He did it so poorly. Remember that?
Yeah.
And Heath Lambert said, if I would have had more time, I would have prepared him how to confess his sin. That's what this would be, the 7 A's of confession. You guys familiar with that?
7 A's?
The 7 A's of confession. You familiar with that? Drew, have you gone through the Peacemaker book?
I've never gone through it, but I've received some counsel from it, and so I
Okay,
do
cool.
know.
Great. So the Peacemaker is an excellent book. We have some of the pamphlets in the back somewhere. And the 7 Days of Confession just goes through how to properly, faithfully, biblically confess your sin. With something like this, or even like bigger like pornography issue, or even adultery, and it is important to counsel somebody how do you confess your sin biblically before they do it, so they don't mess up. So, because it's a big issue with their spouse, major issue. If what's his name would have confessed a little more biblically, his wife probably would have responded a completely different way in that other videos. And in here, he's trying to set them up for confession. Oh, forgive me for this, blah blah blah, or I'm sorry if you were offended, or again, you avoid. One of the A's is avoid ifs and like ands or buts. I'm sorry, but. Like my kids will oftentimes, I'll say, what did you do wrong? I did this, but so and so did this to me. I'm like, I don't want an excuse from you. You acknowledge your sin. After you acknowledge that, you can tell me what the other person did. And you need to not care about their response more than you care about your response. And if that's not addressed young, then it will never be addressed. Probably by their peers, and so when they get older, that'll just be part of their normal life, like it is with everybody in the world right now. I'm sorry if you were offended by that. I'm sorry that you got mad at me for that. You're not sorry. We don't say sorry. We ask for forgiveness. I'm sorry for spilling a drink in your carpet. I didn't mean to do that. I tripped. Forgive me for being angry at you. You see, there's a big difference there.
process of seeking forgiveness and granting forgiveness. An analogy I would use, like in my yard, I have an area that's kind of overgrown with weeds. It used to be a garden. And I could take my weed whacker and kind of mow the weeds down really low, and it would look pretty good for a while, but what would happen? They're going to grow back. And I think a lot of people, when it comes to conflict, they kind of mow the weeds. And sometimes as time passes and you're not so angry anymore, oh, I'm sorry, it's okay. And then the conflicts keep recurring, and the same things come back over and over again. And I think the Bible really teaches how to pull the weeds. And the reason I'm talking about pulling weeds now is, what do you do after you pull the weeds in a garden? You plant flowers and other good things to eat, whatever. And what my real desire for your marriage isn't just to get rid of the weeds, but if the weeds could be pulled, then you're going to be able to have the real enjoyment of each other. I mean, you remember when you first met each other and became engaged and got married, and what joy you had in each other, and that would be the voice you'd want to hear on the phone. And when the garden gets overgrown with weeds over a period of time, and some of these patterns take place, you can almost feel hopeless. Like, well, are we ever going to feel the way we used to? Well, the beginning isn't just to start going out on dates and having a great time. If the garden's full of weeds and you try to plant seeds, they're just going to be choked out. But here he has a summary of what that means in terms of seeking forgiveness, where you're really doing it biblically. I'm going to go through it very briefly because of time, but the audio will explain more, and if you're interested, you can even get the book. But essentially, the first A is address everyone involved when you confess sin. Is there anybody else who needs to be involved in this discussion? If you're seeking forgiveness for what happened the other night?
Well, Tom, I know he noticed, and I know it felt awkward, and I think,
Right. So you probably both need to seek Tom's forgiveness for how your actions affected him. And then avoid if, but, and maybe. The temptation is to say, well, I wouldn't have done this if you hadn't brought him home. Or I wouldn't have yelled at you if you hadn't been grumpy. But you memorized 1 Corinthians 10:13 so well last time, that no temptation has come upon you except what is common to man. God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able. But with the temptation will provide a way of escape. You can bear up under it. And so you can never say, this person tempted me too much and that's why I sinned. You could have chosen, like Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath. You could have chosen to show grace instead of ratcheting up the conflict. So no excuses. Their sin is never an excuse for your sin. So then admit specifically. And specifically, not just, sorry, I was bad. But the things you were saying actually were good. Please forgive me for not contacting you in advance, which was not thoughtful of you, which is, her issue wasn't being contacted. Her issue wasn't how much stake there was. Her issue was that this made her feel unimportant and unappreciated and not shown consideration by you. Do you get that?
yeah.
And then that goes along with acknowledging the hurt that what you did. And I think a big thing when we forgive people, when you're in the position of one doing forgiving, is you want the person not just to understand what they did, but understand how it affected you. And that's what you were saying earlier.
And that's what is the biggest problem with all of these. Like, he'll do a lot of these, but it's that acknowledging the hurt, that he understands, and even that it makes sense that I would be hurt. Like, a lot of times he'll spend a lot of time, like, he'll apologize, but make a big deal about how it really doesn't make sense that I'm hurt. Like, somehow, like, I shouldn't be. And, like, that's the part, like, gets left out.
Right. And that's part of 1 Peter 3:7, that our wives, we have to understand our wives because they're different from us as weaker vessels. So a couple of us as guys can...
That's great. I'm glad you said that, and I totally agree with that. Men need to, acknowledge that they hurt their wives because we're stupid. But I would, and I can't remember if he's going to deal with this or not, but I would talk to her eventually and say, look, I understand that, but you can't demand he understands you. He needs to, and he must, because it's biblical, but you can't demand it, because if you demand it, then you're sinning. So it kind of seems to the point, like, yeah, like I have a right, because he's not understanding me, and he's not acknowledging that I'm hurt. You can't demand that, because that gets you into thinking more of a victim mentality. I'm just a victim here. I deserve everyone to acknowledge that I.
Hit it again.
My phone. That I'm hurt. That I need everyone to acknowledge I'm the victim here. And in our day and age, with things going on in our culture, with the Me Too movement and stuff, everyone is a victim for everything. And men are just a bunch of idiots, and white male Caucasian Christians need to be killed. That's where the culture's going. And so we need to help her say. I should have said that was too far. But we need to help her think, like, you can't demand that. He needs to do that, but you can't demand that, and you can't just think that I'm the victim here. You need to acknowledge that you're sinning in this. Yeah.
Speak firmly to each other, and it's not that big a deal. But if I speak the same way to my wife, she like wilts, and so we have to be very careful. But also, Sarah, since you brought that up, I think it is important that he works hard at understanding you. But do you understand the hurt you caused him?
There you go. Good job, old Jim.
Way to go, Jimbo.
I do now, but I didn't in the moment, like at the time. And even when we talked about it afterward, that didn't come out as much as it did days afterward, and even like today as we're talking about
So
it.
how did you hurt him?
By responding unkindly. He felt, like in a way, like unappreciated, and he didn't feel like I treated him like an equal, like an adult, like
Right,
he
with
wasn't.
respect.
With
right,
respect.
Right. So back to James 4, I mean, you wanted consideration, he wanted respect, and it hurt him to feel disrespected, especially in front of his friend. And so it would mean a lot to him in those circumstances. You have to think about this part in terms of that must have been hard for you. Accept the consequences. Usually, because of grace, there aren't that many consequences. Alter your behavior. What would alter your behavior be next time? I will call.
Just call, yeah.
Yeah, and next time, I'm going to really try to be gracious if I'm not ready. And then asking for forgiveness is actually saying, will you forgive me? It's just as we've asked God to forgive us in Christ in our horizontal relationships, we're asking one another. When I, from time to time, have to seek my wife's forgiveness for things that I seek her forgiveness, and I'm saying, will you forgive me as I've been forgiven in Christ? And of course, as a believer, I ask with hope and confidence that she will. And it's very freeing in marriage. And then the promises of forgiveness are below the verse we looked at last time, Jesse, in Ephesians 4:32, we should forgive each other as God has forgiven us. In Jeremiah 31, it talks about how God remembers our sin. I think it means remembers our sin against us no more. So when you forgive, it means you really determine to put it aside. That's what it means, where I'm not going to think about it, I'm not going to bring it up against you, I'm not going to tell others how bad you are, and essentially I'm going to treat you as if it didn't happen. I'm going to treat you as God treats me. How does God treat you now that you're forgiven, Sarah?
As if I haven't sinned.
As if you were perfect, as you are perfect in Christ. And so forgiveness is when Jesse does seek your forgiveness, then you can grant that forgiveness. But to grant the forgiveness means you don't bring it up, and it means you have a conscious effort you make. I'm going to treat him as God has treated me. And it's actually one of the blessings of marriage is getting to show a Christ-like love to somebody else. You didn't marry a perfect person, but as you've married a fellow sinner, that when you forgive, you're showing some of the grace to him that you've received from Christ. And I know my desire would be in my marriage that my wife and I would both look at each other and say, that must be how Christ loves me, by how gracious. I certainly see it in her. Now, beyond that, and then in future meetings and future things you study, we can talk about this. Once you have, this is essentially the weed pulling process. After you've learned to work those things through, I'm going to give you a verse to read for your homework. It'll be on the audio in Galatians 6:1, describes then how do we correct each other. Jesus says after you've gotten the log out of the eye, you can then take the splinter out of the other person's eye once you've removed your log. But then, instead of coming at them in kind of anger and saying, look what you've done to me, in judgment, you're coming in love. And Galatians 6 says, brethren, if anyone is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore him gently, each looking to yourself so that you will not be tempted. And this is the thing my wife just does beautifully, is when she does correct me, it's not coming and saying, I've had it with you, and venting on me, which makes me want to cover up and hide. If it doesn't happen, but that would be my temptation. But instead it's, I love you whether you change or not, but I know you want to be a more godly man, and here's the thing I think I want to help you with. That makes it much easier. But so much of that is when you see your partner's sin is not so much about you, but it's they've sinned against God, and you're trying to help restore them to the Lord, which then will lead to restoring to each other. But as I said, that's for later. For now, what I want to do, do you think, as I've been describing kind of the weed pulling process, do you think the weeds in your garden are numerous or few? Are you pulling your weeds pretty faithfully?
I wouldn't say that I have asked for forgiveness for every time I've gotten mad at her or when there's conflict, it's always just been easier for me to just either get angry or walk away and not get angry, but not really like.
You think the same?
I think the same. There's a lot of probably unresolved conflict, but so much of it is all related to the same issues. Like we have the same sins that we keep going back to. So if we started like picking a couple weeds, like the other ones would be a lot easier to pull up.
Pull
like
the roots up with one. That's a good analogy, yeah. Yeah, and sometimes a way to seek forgiveness actually is to kind of seek forgiveness for the pattern you see in yourself with some examples to go with it without having, I've been married almost 34 years. I can't remember every single time I've done anything, but I know the kinds of things I do. But I'd like to give you an assignment, and that would be to weed your garden. And what I mean by that would be each of you, I want you to write down where you need to make sure you've sought the other person's forgiveness on issues that haven't been completely resolved. And some of them may be weeds that were mown but never pulled. And then prayerfully deal with that before God, and then to spend time together going through your list together, seeking each other's forgiveness for those issues and granting forgiveness. Do you understand that assignment?
Yeah, I think so. I'm afraid that it's going to turn into a big, like blame game and like here's all the other things.
Like going back and really focusing on all the things, the ways we have sinned against each other,
Yeah.
even maybe ways we.
Well, that's it, a lot of it is your attitude. If you're looking upon it as an opportunity to receive forgiveness and grant forgiveness and to bring the gospel into your marriage, perhaps as never before, where I want the gospel from my wife in terms of I want forgiveness to know these things are really behind me that I've done wrong, and I want to.
So he brings up a great point. Like, I don't want this to turn into a blame game. One of the assignments that I've given to you guys in the past, that we've gone over, and I give a lot in counseling, is called the confronting yourself, like conference table thing. You guys remember that assignment? Based off of the Matthew 7 passage. What you do is you sit down with your spouse like this, and you're trying to figure out and trying to go over the sins you've committed. So you write down on one side of the paper all the ways you have failed and sinned against your spouse. You take turns writing things that you have personally done. And you don't really talk about it at that point. The point is just to bring to the table all the things that you see that you've done, and then after a couple times of you doing that, then your spouse takes a turn and fills in the gaps where you missed. Honey, you sinned here. you forgot to add this. And most couples are pretty gracious with each other, and they don't add a ton more on the bottom, but they, usually just a few things that were missed. And so that's a way that if I was counseling them, I would give them that first, and then it's okay. Here's how we're going to apply the confession of that based off of here's all the things you acknowledge. Now here's how we're going to go and confess all this to your spouse, going through the 7 days of confession and stuff. Or maybe give them at the same time, but say, look, write them down. This isn't time for you to talk about it and argue about it. We're just going to bring them out, acknowledge it, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about how to ask and grant for forgiveness, because that's a whole session in and of itself.
Show grace to my wife as Christ has shown grace to me. That should be something you're excited about. So it's not and that's why Jesus is so wise, saying you begin with yourself. And usually couples need help. And so my assignment would be make as much progress as you can. Come back next week and I'll help you keep moving ahead. Listening to the audio will also kind of color in some of the lines as well. But to make your list on your own, and then to sit down together and go over it, but very graciously with each other, very kindly. And I think there can be a place to say, is there something else that I'm missing here? I know probably I've sinned in ways I don't understand, but if there is, please tell me, and because I really want to have as much as possible a weed-free garden. And for a lot of couples, if they haven't been doing that well, it's like a big process. Just like if I was to go home and try to get that one garden straight, it would be a lot of work to get all that stuff out of there initially. But then once it's out of there and you start planting flowers and nice things, does that mean you'll never have any weeds anymore? No, they'll come back as long as we're in a fallen world. But it's easier to kind of pick them one at a time when they're small than waiting weeks and months till they get big. And so that would be my desire for you all would be, as you really do resolve those things, then we'll keep working on how you can be a blessing more to each other in the marriage and really have the sense that the other person is on your side. And when you look at your spouse, just to see, here's a person who loves me like Christ loves me. And that is a great blessing to have in your marriage. So your assignment is I'll give you this audio, and it's on biblical peacemaking. It goes along with this. To listen to that, and make your list of kind of the logs in your eye. Prayerfully make that list, and then spend time together, set aside some time together this week to go through and try as best as you can to weed the garden, pull the weeds. And then if you get stuck, don't be surprised, don't be upset with each other. Just if you need help, next time I'll kind of help you do some of those things. And then I'm also excited about really moving forward to learning more about how you can be a blessing to each other in the marriage. And then I've got some more things I want you to learn and say. I don't want to pile on too much right now, but that would be a place at least to begin. So do you understand the assignment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you willing to work on that in the next week?
Yeah.
Continue to pray together. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Is there anything I've said that's offended you or think I wasn't really fair to you? Or I know that when I'm talking a lot, and I can be guilty of judging too. So is everything all right between us?
Oh, yeah. No, I just think sometimes it's hard when there's like a history of a reaction or a way of responding to something. It's hard enough for that to try to creep into something like this. And so, no, I just think it's good. It's needed, I think.
I think just as you really think about.
Why would he ask that?
I'm not sure what he said. I mean, there's a history of.
Well, he said, are we okay? I asked that in counseling a lot too. Why would he ask that question though?
He's demonstrating conflict resolution or like a confrontation. Or like
Okay, some
confronting.
demonstration.
He's cut out a lot of their sin, or like helps lead them.
Yeah.
Into
He's
like
confronted them a
sin.
lot.
Yeah, confronted them.
And also, maybe Jesse has expressed with his body language that he's upset. And that happens. When I'm meeting with people, I can tell that they're not okay, that they're not happy. So I ask them, did I offend you? Are you okay with like? And so, and also one of the reasons for him to do that, for me, and for me to do that, for you guys to do that when you meet with people, it gives them the opportunity to either confess that they're angry or sinning against you, or just make sure that everything is okay. And then if something comes up later, you can say, look, but I asked you, and you said that we were fine. So if this is how you resolve the conflict, then you're lying to me, which doesn't offend me, like you're sinning against God. So it kind of clears his conscience as well, JB.
It's also equipping the husband, obviously.
Exactly, yeah. It's equipping the husband, honey, are we okay? I've confronted you on things, are we okay, honey? Yeah, that's good. Last few minutes here.
Wanting to have the privilege of showing God's grace to your spouse and asking the Lord to help you in that. I've just seen amazing transformation. This is actually kind of my favorite kind of counseling, is couples who are godly and have just kind of gotten off track a little bit. When they really see how the gospel comes into their marriage and their relationship with each other, I've seen couples that could hardly look at each other 1 week, 2 weeks later, couldn't take their eyes off of each other, and just a total change. And I'm really hopeful as you apply these principles that the Lord is going to do some great things. Okay. Any closing prayer? Father in heaven, we are thankful for the hope you give us, and that in every relationship we have hope of reconciliation because of what Christ has done. Help us as far as it is possible with us to be at peace, and especially to apply these principles, to be quick to seek forgiveness, to be quick to listen to others, to consider others more important than ourselves, and to grant forgiveness as we've been forgiven. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. That was a pretty typical session with a Christian couple, and unresolved conflict, bitterness, frustration, and it is among my favorite situations in which to counsel because real believers love the gospel, and real believers resonate with these truths of granting forgiveness to each other. Jesus makes it so plain in terms of where we begin, in terms of dealing with our own sin. And because of our pride, we want to hang on to it. But once we humble ourselves before God and before each other, I've just seen so many great things happen. So I thought this was a good example. Their conflicts, again, were kind of low-grade conflicts compared to some that would come into a counseling center that get pretty heated, pretty scary, although it's probably pretty typical of what you would see in a local church. The session was also somewhat typical in that you can't in an hour cover everything in peacemaking, but you want to send them away with enough to get started. And so establishing the principle that first you need to deal with your own sin is very important. And then some of kind of how to do that, why to do that biblically. I decided that a lot of people don't see themselves as being the big sinner because what they wanted seemed to be what they had a right to, which is why I jumped into James 4, that we can want things that are valid but be sinful when we don't get what we want. And it is a very common assignment we and many other biblical counselors give a couple like this, would be to go home and really focus on where are the planks, where are the logs in your own eye, and work towards asking and seeking forgiveness. Typically, people come back having tried and needing a lot of help after that first shot. Sometimes they come back and already there is an amazing change. As I said earlier, it's among my favorite kinds of counseling to do, because when real Christians begin to see how the gospel transforms their relationship to each other from one of judgment to being one of grace, change can take place very quickly, very dramatically, and there's just a whole lot of joy in the room. So in a case like this, I'd be very optimistic about what's going to happen next. Something that I thought of doing if I would have gotten further, maybe in the next session, I would probably look for another couple in the church to mentor them through some basic marriage material once we've gotten past kind of the basic peacemaking material, and to find a godly couple, maybe ones who've been through some of this already and are doing really well years later, to go through something like, Tim Keller's book on marriage, or Dave Harvey's When Sinners Say I Do,
It's a great book.
and to spend time together talking
Not Tim Keller's.
through that kind of under my supervision at a distance, as soon as I'm sure they're going in the right direction. And of course, you would love for them to be at the point where in the future, as their lives have been transformed, they could become the mentoring couple themselves someday. So I think just as their marriage has got problems and is limited until these weeds are dealt with and they learn how to deal with them consistently, I wouldn't be like pushing them right now, well, go get involved and serve in this way and that way. I think being involved in the means of grace in the church in terms of attending and being involved in home groups and all that is great. But I would like to see their marriage strengthened, and then they'll be able to be an asset, to be a blessing to others.
Is Tim Keller not?
Yeah, the comment about Tim Keller, maybe I shouldn't have said that. His book on marriage, I've never read it, but I've actually heard some decent reviews about it. But his stuff on like the church and church planting and other stuff, this is really bad. Yeah, he has some kind of some whacked views on some things, but there's a good review on his book on the church. I think it's called Center Church or something.
Reasons for God from him.
I haven't read it. I mean, some of the stuff that Tim Keller writes is really, really good, but some of the stuff, especially on church ecclesiology, is pretty poor. Pretty bad. But yeah, anyway, so that's it, guys. You made it. So those of you who've been with us from week 1, day 1 of our introduction class, like Brooke, JB, like Dustin, you've been there too. And some of you have only been here for about a year. Andy, this is
Actually, I've seen this before.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So this is your second kind of time in this one class. So a few of you guys have made it. A few of you are only halfway in. So more to do next year. But I appreciate you taking this time. And please apply these principles to your own heart and to your own lives and to the lives of those around you. You don't have to make sure it's formal to do anything about it. You just have to make sure you're loving people to talk to them about the gospel. Right? That's why we're in this town. I was reminded this week when we have puke and pee and broken lights that people get mad at the gospel sign because our P sign is out there again. Hey, please don't pee here. You can repent and believe the gospel. that makes people angry. So then they actually want to tear it up and pee on the sign. And then they want to break our lights. That's why we're here. That's why I was reminded. That's why we're here. And, it's just a call for us to be faithful in this town. We'll have some, Adam made a really epic flyer for marriage counseling. We're going to have that in the flyer this week and put posters around town just to inform the town that we are here to help their marriages. We want marriages to reflect the gospel as God intended, and so we want to let people know about that. There's just a lot of need. So we can apply these principles. We can apply this stuff practically. All right, guys, let me go and pray.
Thanks, Pastor Matt. Good stuff.
Yeah. Father, we thank you for this time. What a privilege, what a joy to teach these classes, to watch these 10 or 11 or so videos that we've seen, to see other godly men counsel from your word, and to be equipped and to do so. May we continue to equip ourselves with reading your word, reading other books, doing the homework, to be transformed in our thinking, in our minds, our actions, our behavior, and to be equipped to counsel one another from your word, to present every man complete in Christ when they stand before you in heaven. May that be our zeal, our ambition, our goals, Father. We pray all this in your name. Amen. All right, thanks, guys.